So some of you know the Van Gogh story, right? All this goes crazy, he cuts off his own ear, wraps it up and gives it to a woman. That's the version everyone gets taught. That's the version that's been repeated for over 100 years. But hold on, it's probably not what actually happened. And the real story is so much more crazier than the one you were told. So first, let me give you a quick picture of who Van Gogh actually was. So in 1888, Van Gogh is 35 years old. He's been painting non-stop for about 5 years. And despite what most people think, he wasn't some torturing nobody in the corner. He was deeply connected to the art world. He knew people, he had opinions, he had visions, but he was also struggling mentally, physically, and financially. I can relate to that last one. He was also barely eating, he was drinking too much, he was working like a dog, sometimes painting 3 or 4 canvases in a single day. And he was lonely, like really lonely. He had this dream of creating an artist community in the south of France, a place where painters could live and work together and push each other. He moved to Ars, this small town in the south of France, and he was waiting for someone to come join him. And eventually, someone did. That someone is Paul Gauguin. Now, Paul is so important to this whole story, so let me tell you who he was. He was this painter, brilliant, arrogant, and completely believed he was a genius, which honestly he was. Now, Van Gogh basically begged Gauguin to come to ours, wrote him letters, promised him free rent, painted his bedroom to make it look nice. He was really excited for Paul, like a kid waiting for their best friend to come stay. Now, finally, Paul showed up in October 1888, and almost immediately things get tensed. These two were very strong personalities with very different ideas about art and life. Van Gogh was emotional, intense, chaotic. Paul was cold, controlled, superior. They argued constantly about painting, about women, about money, about everything. And Gogin later said he felt like he was living with a volcano. But like all male relationships, they kept going, and despite everything, they also really push each other creatively. Some of Van Gogh's most famous works came from this period, like Starry Night, which came shortly after, The Sunflowers, Bedroom. This was Van Gogh at his peak and also at the edge of his breaking point. Now, fast forward to the night of December 23rd, 1888. The official story, the one everyone knows, is this. Van Gogh had a mental breakdown. He picked up a razor, cut off the lower part of his left ear, wrapped it in a newspaper, walked to a nearby hotel, asked for a woman named Rachel, handed her the ear, went home, collapsed, and was found the next morning in bed, covered in blood. Now, Gogin had already left by this time, packed his bags and gone. And that's how the story has been told ever since. But here's where it gets interesting. Because in 2009, two historians, Hans and Rita, published a book. And in that book, they made a claim that completely reframed the whole story. They said Gogin cut off Van Gogh's ear, not Van Gogh, Gogin. Now, here's our argument. Gogin was a trained fencer. He was skilled with a blade. The cut on Van Gogh's ear was described by the doctor who treated him as clean and precise, not the kind of cut a distressed person would make on himself in the dark. And Gogin, he was by convenience already gone by the time anyone arrived, left in the middle of the night, never came back. He never really spoke about the incident at all his whole life. And here's the really wild part. Van Gogh never blamed Gauguin, not once. Despite writing hundreds of letters to his brothers, to his friends, to his fellow artists, he never accused Gauguin of anything. He barely said anything about that night. Now, the real question is, why would a man who just had his ear cut off protect the person who did it? Unless they made an agreement to never speak on it. Now, think about the situation. Two men alone in a house. Not that kind of situation. This situation I'm talking about. One ends up with a severed ear. The other leaves in the middle of the night. If Gauguin did it, even accidentally during a fight, that's potentially a crime, an assault, maybe worse depending on how the authorities look at it. Van Gogh protecting Gauguin actually makes emotional sense if you think about it. Despite everything, he really cared about Gogh. He begged him to come. He didn't want to destroy his reputation. He didn't want to destroy all he has worked for. And Gogh, he had everything to lose. His career, his freedom, his reputation. So maybe this is the theory. They both agreed to say nothing. Van Gogh took the blame and Gogh walked away. And they all believed the version they were given. Okay, but regardless of what happened, what about the air delivery? Because that part of the story is really strange, no matter what version you believe in. For over 100 years, the story was that Van Gogh gave the ear to a random woman at a hotel named Rachel. Nobody knew who she was, just some anonymous woman who received a severed ear from a bleeding artist at her door. But then in 2016, a historian named Martin Bailey did some digging and he found out who Rachel actually was. Her name was Gabrielle Bellatier, and she wasn't just some random woman at the hotel. She was someone Van Gogh knew, someone from his life in Ars. And here's the chilling detail that makes this all so uncomfortable. Earlier that same year, Gabrielle had been attacked by a wild animal and had to have a painful medical procedure on her ear. So Van Gogh, knowing this woman, knowing what she'd been through, shows up at her door with a severed ear. Was it a twisted gesture? Was he crazy? I don't know. But Gabrielle never spoke about it publicly. So after that night, Van Gogh did something that most people don't know about. He checked himself into an asylum voluntarily. Nobody forced him. He walked in himself, asked to be admitted, spent over a year there at St. Paul de Marsol Asylum in St. Remy. And here's the thing, he kept painting this whole time. Doctors let him have his own studio there. That's really nice of them. And around that time, he produced 150 paintings, including some of his most famous works like Starry Night. Just let that sink in for a second. One of the most beloved paintings in history was created by a man who had just had his ear cut off by himself or someone else. So after 1 year, Van Gogh leaves the asylum around May 1890. He moved north and he kept on painting. 2 months later, he was found dead. Authorities ruled it as a suicide, though some historians in recent years have questioned that. What about Gauguin? Well, he lived another 13 years. He moved to Tahiti. He kept painting, never really addressed what happened that night in any meaningful way. And the ear, nobody knows what happened to it. Gabriel kept it for a while, apparently it just disappears from history. Like and subscribe, and if you're interested in watching another of my videos talking about how this painting exposed the church, click on it now. Bye.